at all.
I don't think the mic is on.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on now. Now it's on.
You might have to hold it close.
You want mine?
Is this working? Yeah.
Yes.
Or just pass one of these down.
Perhaps the third time's a charm. So for the third time, I'd like to call to order the annual reorganization meeting of the Berners Township Board of Education. And yes, we have paid our electric bills, but apparently our microphones aren't working all. That said, I'd like to ask everyone first to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For the sake of expediency, I will not read the statement of public meeting notice. However, there is a copy of it in the board agenda for anyone who so cares to read it. At this time, I'd like to begin with the actual reorganization of the board, and the first thing we would do is to swear in those members who were duly elected in November. So at this time, I'd like to ask Mrs. Wooldridge, Mrs. Korn, and Mrs. White to come to the front of the center of the stage to take the oath of office.
I think he probably has it over there. He's going to go give it to you.
At this time, I'd like to call the roll. Mrs. Swerner?
Here.
Mrs. Gray?
Here.
Mrs. White?
Here.
Mrs. McCune?
Here.
Mrs. Richmond?
Here.
Mrs. Korn?
Here.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Here.
Mr. Markarian?
Here.
Just a point of business before we get to the election of the board president. I have distributed to every member here this evening a copy of the Code of Ethics, which we are required to give to each board member annually. And there is an acknowledgement of receipt of same there. If you would return that to me at your earliest convenience, just the acknowledgement, I would appreciate that. Thank you. At this time, our next order of business is the election of a new board president. I'd like to call for nominations for president of the Berners Township Board of Education. The chair recognizes Mrs. Werner.
I nominate Robin McCune.
Is there a second? Richmond? Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, I would ask for a motion to close nominations. Mrs. Werner, is there a second? Mrs. Wooldridge? This time I'll call the roll as a matter of formality. Mrs. Werner?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune? Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Congratulations. This time I'd like to pass the gavel to you.
Yeah, and then you hand it
Oh, really? That's so cute.
Bev jumped out of the chair. You see how fast she got out of the chair?
The vote is finished.
Okay. So now we're up to the election of the board vice president. Would anyone like to make a nomination? Mrs. Wooldridge.
I nominate Karen Gray.
Would anyone like to second that? I don't know who, I guess. Okay, Mrs. Korn is seconding it. Are there any other nominations for vice president? Okay, so I guess we need a roll call.
So we should close the
Close the nominations and then take a roll call. Oh, we need a motion to close. Mrs. Swerner and Mrs. Wooldridge. Okay. Yeah.
Mrs. Werner?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. I think we're up. We did that in 12 minutes instead of 20. Okay, so now we're in the regular session agenda. The first thing is the approval of the 2018-2019 Board of Education meeting schedule. So hopefully everyone had a chance to look at these dates already. I know we made one little change last month. So I guess we need a motion to approve these dates. Someone like to make a motion? Mrs. Wooldridge and Mrs. Swerner seconded it. And we'll take a roll call.
Mrs. Swerner?
Yes.
Mrs. Gray?
Yes.
Mrs. White?
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond?
Yes.
Mrs. Korn?
Yes.
Mrs. Wooldridge?
Yes.
Mrs. McCune?
Yes.
Madam President?
Thank you. So we are now, we did the distribution of the Ethics Act already, and I think you collected them all. So we're up to the board presentation. So the board's going to go down in the audience for that. And take your packet, because you have a
So thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. I'm Nick Markarian, I'm the superintendent, and here with us tonight is our Director of School Counseling, Jillian Shadis. Unfortunately, Dr. Heineman was ill today and couldn't be here with us to help present, but Jillian is more than capable of helping us through the presentation, and obviously if we have any questions that we need to direct to Dr. Heineman, we will pass those along to him, and we'll bring the information back to you. So thank you for that. Jillian?
Thank you. I will do my best Dr. Heineman impression when the time comes. Seriously, though, welcome back. Happy New Year. This is a presentation I actually look forward to giving every year. It's actually some good news, some fun news for a change from the counseling department, and I take every opportunity to bask in that glory when I can. So a quick reminder, though, I usually do give this presentation earlier in the school year. However, for a myriad of reasons, it got bumped back. So please do remember that all the information, unless otherwise noted, is for the class of 2017, so the class that has already fully graduated. There are also a lot of data in this presentation, some of which I'm going to go through pretty quickly, but certainly afterwards you have copies and it'll be posted on the Bernards Township Board of Ed website under presentations as well tomorrow. I'm certainly happy to entertain any questions at a later date if it's not something that I cover tonight. So with that said, I will start off with standardized testing. Following through with the trends from several years back, we have an increase in the number of students taking the ACTs at Ridge and a decrease in the number of students taking the SATs. As I said, it's been the same thing for a few years. We also have to recall that for the class of 2017, they were caught in the quote-unquote change in the SAT from the old design to the new redesigned test. And anecdotally, we heard that that did scare off more students who were uncertain of what to expect, and they thought, you know what, let me just take the safe bet, let me go with the ACTs instead for this year. So as I said, in March 2016, the scoring changed from a 2400 scale back to a 1600 scale, for those of you old enough to recall that. The writing section became optional again. For the 2016 report that I presented last year, all the scores were converted to the old scale, and I use quotes, by the College Board. So that's what they were reported on. This year, therefore, the class of 2017 has totally new data points. All of the scores were converted to the new SAT scores by the College Board before we received those reports. So the main comparisons that we do have this year are from New Jersey and nationally from the College Board, and then unofficially I did look up some of our other comparison districts as well. So the SAT is now called the College Admissions Test. It doesn't say whether it's aptitude or achievement. The critical reading section is gone and instead has been replaced with the evidence-based reading and writing section. So if you see EBRW, that's what that stands for. And the SAT essay portion is optional, much like the ACT. The timing of the two tests, the SAT and the ACT, is much more similar than it used to be. And like the ACT, the SAT no longer has a guessing penalty. The scoring is still 200 to 800 in each section, but again, only up to 1600 for the main combined score. The writing is separate. There are no changes for the ACT for the actual test for last year. So our graphs are a little lonely this year. Our SAT mean scores in evidence-based reading and writing, Ridge scored a 636, and in math, it was a 643. You can see that it is well above both the New Jersey and the national means. Comparison districts. Several years back, and Mr. Markarian and I were trying to figure out how long ago that was, we issued the MAG 7 for a better, quote-unquote, list of districts that we felt we were able to compare ourselves to based on the old district factor group, which no longer exists, and the fact that the New Jersey report cards changed to the performance report and the same comparisons were not issued, our peer group changed year to year. So these were the schools in general that we compared ourselves to then, and I continued that on this year by looking up their school profiles and contacting their admissions office or their counseling offices. I will note that Millburn does not release their scores. A few of you may know I used to work there. I did try to call in some favors. They are really not releasing them on their profile to anyone but the colleges. Princeton, I don't necessarily have a direct connection there, but they indicated the same thing. Ridgewood, they did not provide a divided reading and writing versus math, only their combined SAT score was offered. So this one is alphabetical. And then to get a better idea of where we fall in terms of that group, this is in order of score, so only Montgomery and West Windsor, Plainsboro, North and South combined scored above us in terms of the means. Again, combined scores instead of breaking them out separately, math and reading. You may think I copied and pasted the 2016 to 2017, but I really didn't. Our scores were almost as flat as they could be. Math was down by 1/10 of a point, but every other subject area was exactly the same: the composite, the English, the reading, science, and the writing score. Now, I did mention that the writing score, there were no changes in the test, but the scoring scale was modified, so we have clean data points just for the writing section of the ACT, starting with the class of 2017. ACT also provides benchmarks. A benchmark scores the minimum score needed on the subject area test to indicate a 50% chance of obtaining a B or higher, or a 75% chance of obtaining a C or higher in the corresponding credit-bearing college courses. So the comparison below shows you the college course or the course area, the ACT section that it correlates to, and what ACT has set out as a benchmark score. In regards to the Ridge students who have met the benchmarks, our percentage rose in English and reading areas, but dropped only slightly in math and science. In all 4 testing areas, we were down by only 1 percentage point. I have the New Jersey scores there for comparison, but we are significantly above them in all areas. Using those same comparison districts, same issue with Millburn and Princeton, scores are not released. Glen Rock, they're just not reported. They don't include them on their profile. They said that not enough of their students really take it at this point. They're a much smaller district too, to make that worthwhile for them. So that's alphabetically, and again, we have the comparison districts in order. We are in the middle of the pack, very 1/10 of a point away from Ridgewood. I have a couple hypotheses as to why we might be a little bit lower in the ACTs. Again, these are just hypotheses, no research, more anecdotal. We see often a different type of student taking the ACT than the SAT. Students who feel that they may not be as strong in math or have not moved as far along in the math progression here at Ridge, often in the past would have shied away from the SAT because the math was more rigorous, widely known to be. Again, I mentioned a lot of students were scared by those SAT changes and thought maybe safe than sorry, let me just take the ACT. And also, some of the schools listed above offer different types of test prep to their students, and I'll talk about test prep a little bit more in a few slides. So I always do the comparison, not that this is a royal battle or anything, but the SAT wins again, as it has for every year that I've presented it, if you want to call it winning. But the margin is much, much closer than it ever has been. If you take the approximate SAT equivalent of each of those ACT scores, the means for those 3 areas, then the SAT beats out by only about 13 points in terms of the composite scores. So they're closer than they have ever been in terms of Ridge students and which test they score better on. SAT subject tests. These are generally taken by students in AP courses here at Ridge, but honor students also take them. Some colleges recommend or require them, which is why students take them. And the students themselves generally self-select which of those tests to take, even though some colleges or programs may have more specific requirements. The most notable are many engineering programs will specify perhaps a physics, a math 2, et cetera, et cetera. Our department area supervisors have put together a document that we have posted on the counseling department site and that I send out via Friday folder a couple times a year just as a reminder that talks about the Ridge curriculum and what parts of the SAT subject test it does and does not cover, or what additional studying may be necessary for students who wish to succeed on that test. We have no real control over who takes it, and sometimes it's hard to correlate where these scores are coming from to our Ridge courses as well for that reason. For the SAT mean scores, I only report for test takers where there are 5 or more. We have a number of those where we had fewer than those take that, but for privacy purposes. Those numbers are all at or above the New Jersey national means, with the exception of chemistry, which is something that we've discussed with the board before, BOE. Dr. Heineman actually did send me some notes, fever-ridden notes, but notes nonetheless. And he asked me to remind you that chemistry has always been our lowest scoring and has resisted all of our attempts to adjust curriculum, pacing, and summer work. The data we have shows that students are in more advanced mathematics courses, primarily pre-calc, have the most success. This year, we've changed the program of studies to recommend students that need or desire to take this particular SAT take AP Chem as a junior and then take the test in June. We know this will give them the math and chem background needed to tackle what we know is particularly difficult. Okay, to give you an idea of the 5-year comparison for each of the subject areas, please keep in mind that each of the, the number of test takers varies from year to year. So these, you may have scores for 10 kids one year and 20 kids another year. They're usually not that far off, but there is a little bit of fluctuation that is not necessarily accounted for in these graphs directly. So we have literature and US history, Math 1 and Math 2. Math 1 includes all math through Algebra 2, and Math 2, all math through pre-calculus, and all of the sciences. Test prep, which I had alluded to a little while ago. Ridge offers Method Test Prep 2.0, an online program free to students, even though there is a cost to the district, to any and all Ridge students who wish to take advantage of it. There is SAT and ACT practice. There are various types of modalities, audio, video, written explanations on how to solve every question. They break up the practice. There's a whole week by week if the student chooses to take advantage of it, or he or she can target specific topics or specific areas. The program will track the performance and tell the student what they're stronger or weaker on, and then direct them to the appropriate practice for that, and there's complete practice quizzes and full-length practice tests. Traditionally, however, it is not widely used at Ridge. You can see that last year in 16-17, 153 students at least logged on to the program to see whether it's just creating an account or actually did something that first time, we're not sure. And only 27 students used it at least 15 times. A couple years ago, as part of a survey that the counseling department did, we asked why, and the reason was more not that this was bad or they didn't want to use this, but that they were seeking other forms of in-person in-class tutoring, and some perhaps were just utilizing this either as extra, or there's a handful that probably are using it in lieu of some other form of testing as well. This year I'm currently exploring a partnership with the Kaplan Test Prep Company. They offer a, I don't know if you want a deal, so to speak. If we host 2 practice assessments here at Ridge over the course of next school year, they will give us access to all of their online materials for every student at Ridge for free. So we, in the counseling department, have been looking to bring ACT prep here to Ridge, because that's not something we offer. You know, we have the PSAT, but nothing equivalent for the ACT, and that might be a nice benefit we get out of it. Mr. Kraus is on board. I've checked all the references for several other schools that Kaplan partners with and their online program, and all looks good. Districts like Montgomery, other similar districts to ours. And hopefully we'll be able to get this in for 2018 and 19. I don't see why not. But whether or not we're going to use it in addition to method test prep or in lieu of is still to be determined. Okay, here comes my Dr. Heineman hat. He did offer notes for some of these, so most of the, I'll explain the data, which I put together and can certainly answer any questions on, but a lot of the extrapolation and interpretation is a little bit, it's more his. But I will do my best. Overall, for the 2016-17 school year, it was a high point for student participation, at least in the 6 or 7 years that I've been putting together this report. We actually broke the 90% mark for the first time. So 93.1% of students enrolled in an AP course actually sat for and took the exam, which I think was pretty impressive given that we no longer offer things like student senior incentives and things like that that we used to in past years too. These next two complicated cross-eyed charts detail year to year how many students were enrolled and how many students actually took the exam. A few highlights: there was a significant uptick in AP Computer Science enrollment for last year. Last year, we did allow 10th graders to take AP Computer Science, and they did make up a good portion of that class, so that is the reason for that upswing. And also, Dr. Heineman asked me to remind you that we see the full implementation of the new AP Physics progression with the changes in the College Board physics tests through the numbers here on this. So throughout the physics numbers for Physics 1 and 2 specifically are gonna look a little off. For the other subject areas, government and economics and macroeconomics tests are both up in terms of participation and the number taking the exam. Reminder that the AP Gov and Econ class here at Ridge does prepare the students for both tests, even though not 100% choose to take both of them. Also, last year was an off year for AP Latin. The test is only offered every other year. So for this, I'd like to note that it is the 2015-16 data because the information from for these next couple of slides are pulled from the New Jersey performance reports, and the 16-17 performance report is not yet available. So we're always 1 year lagging with the data for these particular slides. In general, though, 66.5% of our students participate in one or more AP classes, and 61.2% take at least one AP exam during their tenure here at Ridge. Looking specifically at the core subject areas, 43.9% of students have one AP exam in English, math, social studies, or science. Again, well above the state averages. 96.7% of students passed the AP exam that they sat for last year, and 93.9% did so in the core subject areas that I previously mentioned. So this is incredible success, even with increased participation and participation of some students in younger grades as well. This is a breakdown of the past exams, how many were 5s, 4s, and 3s. 5 being the highest, 3 being the minimum passing score. Far more students earned those 5s last year, as in previous years, than 3s and 4s, and we continue to see upward trends. AP Equity and Excellence. The score that the AP company offers is the percentage of AP students per grade level who scored 3 or higher on at least one AP exam in that given year, divided by the total number of students in each grade. So first and foremost, don't panic that the numbers are a little lower, especially that 10th grade number, because we only have a small number of 10th graders sitting for an AP exam, and it's divided by the total number of students in the class. The 13.3 is definitely not a bad thing. And to give you a better idea of that, you can see that it's actually for 10th grade, almost double, not quite, from 2016 for those 10th graders. The 11th graders are up a little, and the 12th graders with a larger class size are just slightly down. We have more students last year taking at least one AP exam than we did in any prior year. Again, given that it was one of actually the largest Ridge class that had graduated. Each of these subject areas I'm breaking down into 3 slides. So the first slide will be the total number of test takers for each over the last 5 years. We're back to the norm here in language and composition. After the bump that we saw in the number of test takers in 2014 and 15, we've kind of evened out again. The second in each slide is the percentage of test takers passing, and I'm pleased to report that a lot of them look like this. Not much change, not much difference, and that they're all very high. And finally, a breakdown of those passing scores. Of the kids who passed, how many got 5s, 4s, and 3s. Again, you'll see that jump in computer science from the 10th graders who are permitted to enroll in the total number of test takers for math. And you'll also notice that the percentage of test takers passing is down in that same area. This is the first AP exam that most of those kids have taken ever. Like, that whole experience is new for them. Whereas in comparison, when we have mostly 11th and 12th grade, like, that sort of newness is spread out over the course of other exams. Dr. Heineman expects it to stabilize over the next 2 to 3 years once we have more stability in terms of the grade level of the students who are taking the class. Aside from computer science, we see an exceptionally high number of students, specifically in math, passing with a 5. And in the total number of test takers, here's where the physics numbers get a little funky, again, due to the changes in the exams by College Board, and therefore the different course curriculum changes that had to follow, and which of our courses here prepared students for which of those tests, 1, 2, or C. Again, Dr. Heineman expects it to stabilize over a few years. Our number of test takers passing, the vast majority, are all increases. And you'll see a variation of subject areas in regards to how many students received each 5s, 4s, and 3s. You'll again see that spike in that purple bar for the Gov and Politics and Macro in terms of the number of test takers for those particular areas, as well as for the scores in the test taker, the number of test takers passing. I'm sorry, the percentage of test takers passing. European history typically is just one section here. And so you see much smaller in terms of numbers taking them. For world language, we're not showing the Latin. We did not offer it last year, or it was not offered last year. This is my favorite graph, I think, of the whole presentation. Hopefully next year it'll be clean straight through. We'll see. No pressure. And again, the breakdown of passing scores. Fine arts, we have only a handful of students doing the studio art 2D and 3D. And all of those students passed drawing 2D and 3D. But we are withholding the identity of the 2D and 3D to prevent, for privacy issues. I usually do a graph of the summary in terms of the percentage of point changes, and I always hated that slide, so I tried something different. You can let me know if you like it or not. But this is the percentage point change in the passing rate. So as we had talked about, computer science saw the biggest overall drop from last year, and then we go straight through to physics 2, which had the largest growth, but again, that's a little bit more of an anomaly because of the physics changes. So if you look at it, physics C, E, and M had the second largest growth, last year, but the vast majority are either status quo, and a lot of those are status quo at 100%, as you saw in the previous slides, and we have very little, relatively speaking, in terms of drops. Okay, college admissions is my favorite part. 487 students graduated with the class of 2017 last year. The vast, vast majority went to a four-year school, followed by a two-year college, making 97.1% of them continuing their education in some way. Next, we have students who sought a job, who we didn't report, don't know, weren't sure, so we have a little bit of variation there, but by and large, they're continuing their education. For the 2017 class profile, again, our largest class ever, our GPA was hundredths of a point down. Our PSAT and SAT, for reasons explained before, aren't comparable to years prior. The ACT rounded was exactly the same. The number of applications submitted is up. The percentage accepted is down by 2 percentage points, but considering that we have more applications submitted overall and per student, anecdotally, the counselors find that when students add more colleges, they tend to be reaches. We saw increased interest in applications to Indiana University, Rutgers, which is on the list every year. I don't know how much higher they're going to be able to get, but they continue to grow. Michigan, Clemson, College of Charleston, Pitt, Tulane, Drexel, TCNJ, University of Miami, and Fordham. And decreased in Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, NJIT, Villanova, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Susquehanna, Texas at Austin, James Madison, Roger Williams, UCLA, and Rutgers at Newark. Again, also keep in mind that the class sizes vary a little bit between the 2 years. Our teachers write an awful lot of recommendations. Last year they saw an increase, but given the number of additional students, it was only about not quite one additional letter per teacher who wrote, so that's not terrible, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. The good thing is certainly they write one letter of recommendation. It doesn't matter how many schools the student is applying to, so that certainly helps as well. But this year we actually had one teacher write 65 letters of recommendation, which I thought was pretty darn impressive. Colleges visit here at Ridge in the fall, usually through the end of November, sometimes a little bit into December, and our juniors and seniors are permitted to, with their teacher's permission, attend those visits down in the Media Center. So last year we hosted 152 colleges, and we saw an average of 7.76 students per visit, although if you take a look at the most attended visits on the right, some of them were far, far above it. Last year, we actually had to limit the number of daytime visits because of the time and space that we take up in the Media Center, and also the amount of time that the counselors devote to greeting and working with the reps and sitting through the presentations. They were, in prior years, being pulled out 2 to 3 times a week, which during letter writing season and meeting with students is an awful lot. So we added, to compensate for that, some before and after school visits, and it worked well. We found that the students, naturally, who came before and after school were the ones who were really genuinely interested in those colleges. Shocking, yes, I know. As opposed to, and this is certainly not all students, but there are some students who may just want to avoid a particular class on a particular day. It's been known to happen. Our instant decision interview program continues to do well. The students are vetted for instant decision or interview appointments prior so that they're set up for success. In some instances, there are students who the rep will agree to interview, even if it's an instant decision day, knowing that they would not be admissible on the spot. They'll still give them a chance to touch base. So we can, some of those, when you see that the student wasn't later admitted, they probably had an idea that they may not be qualified for that particular school. We actually had more interested students than available slots that the rep was able to give us, which is both a good and bad problem to have. And I was probably more nervous than the student, but we had our first Skype interview last year with a representative for the University of Georgia. So once the technology piece was set up and good to go, it actually, it went pretty well. And it was a good alternative for someone who wasn't able to necessarily get down to campus at the right time frame. College comparisons. I mention every year, and I will say it again, that the categories are not clearly defined by Naviance. One of the things, I look again this year just to see if by some chance a definition has been posted. I did notice actually that not only is it not posted, but some colleges change categories from past years, because I have my lists from past years. So I'm not entirely sure what criteria they're using, but in any event, you can still get a basic idea in terms of the different levels of schools that are competitive. Ivy League showing 2% growth, and the vast majority showing growth as well, especially those less competitive schools. It was a nice 10% jump there. The Ivy Leagues are what we always are asked about, and last year, 20 members of the class of 2017, bless you, matriculated to an Ivy League school. That is in comparison to 10 from the prior year. And again, it was a bigger class, but we also had more applications to the Ivy League schools, 180 net apps after all those withdrawals were taken care of. And last year in 2016, it was 140. So 40 more apps and 10 more attending. On the left-hand side, you'll see the matriculation by type, and four-year college is up, as was also seen on the pie chart a few slides ago. And on the right-hand side, we have the top 10 states that our students are going to. And for the most part, they're within a reasonable driving distance. They're choosing to stay within a couple hours of home on the whole. This year was the first year we have access to the alumni tracking system through Naviance. They partner with the National Student Clearinghouse to give us some additional data. I wasn't quite sure what we would find, but for this particular graph in regards to enrollment status, since the data is not available in Naviance for the school until the end of the student's freshman year, the classes of 14 through 16 are the classes we would still expect to be in college currently, or I should say as of last year. So as of last year, more than 50% of them were still enrolled full-time. I was a little disappointed when I saw that there were so many unspecified or no records on there, but the students can certainly opt out of being part of the student clearinghouse once they get to colleges, and then certainly their data is not reported. The other bit of information that it shows us is the time it took to earn a four-year degree. So the classes of 2010 through 13 are the classes we would expect to have graduated if they were on a four-year track. And 72% of them did it in 4 years, and 14% did it in less than 4 years. So it's good news overall as well. Okay, college admissions news. Some of this news, I will fully admit, blends into the current application system because I had my notes and then they've already been updated. So why am I going to present past news if I have more current news? So some of this does involve the class of 2018. So more schools were invited into the coalition. If you remember, the coalition was a huge deal, and all folks, including myself, were incredibly panicked when this new application came to be, and it turned out not to be that bad. Students were good in following our advice to only use it the first year where they had to, where the coalition was the only option, which gave schools the Naviance end of things a year to work out the quirks with the sending of the data. And then this year we did have more students applying using the coalition app because multiple schools were on it. And knock on wood, I am not aware of any major problems or issues if the students followed the appropriate procedures that we had outlined for them. But more schools were invited into the coalition. It was, criteria was relaxed, allowing a more diverse array of schools into the program. That was one of the criticisms they found from the community, not necessarily from high schools, but in general, that they were forming a group that was a bit elitist. So at first, colleges needed to meet 3 criteria. They needed to show, demonstrate access, affordability, and success, and now they just need to meet 2 of the 3 to be part of the coalition. Self-reporting. Self-reporting is when a student does not need to send a transcript with their application. Instead, they will log on to a portal and they will enter each course, the grade they earned in it, the number of credits they earned with it, et cetera, one by one into the portal, and the high school doesn't need to follow up with an official transcript unless they end up enrolling there, so that would only be at the end of the year. So schools are allowing self-reporting of test scores a lot, they're telling us, because it costs so much to send. It's $12 per school for the ACT, because they're accepting some of those self-reported schools there. They find that it's cost prohibitive for some students to send their scores, so that just sort of follows up with the trend that we see on the actual number of schools for the transcript bit of it going up as well. Okay, big surprise. I think I've said this every year as well. Number of applications increase and the admissions rate decreases. Just as one example, NYU marked the 10th straight year of record applications. They had 67,000 apps, and the admit rate fell from 35 to 27%. So you see statistics like this all over the place. I just picked one since a lot of our students do apply to NYU. But the more applications they get, the more selective they can be. Just like orange is the new black, early is the new normal. Colleges are finding it on their side that more of their students are applying early. They want more of their students to apply early, whether that be early decision or early action, because they have a better sense of their overall yield earlier on. And within the counseling department, we're certainly finding it. Short of having to fill out perhaps another application or do another essay or something like that, there really is no harm in a student applying early action at least. And we certainly encourage our students to do that, to sort of see where they fall in terms of their choices a little earlier on so they can make better decisions for regular decision if necessary. The number of test optional schools are on the rise. When I first reported they were on the rise in 2014, there were just over 800 schools, and now there are just over 1,000. So they're definitely on an upward trend, and just under 200 schools dropped their testing requirement over the past 3 years. Schools are now accepting video applications or supplements. So for instance, Goucher will take videos in lieu of test scores. Go figure. Babson will take a 1-minute video instead of a 1-page essay. George Mason will take supplemental videos. The admissions officers are saying that this appeals more to the students in this generation who are used to putting their life in video and photos and having that sort of out there to begin with. It always raises a little bit of a caution that whatever is out there, whether you actually send it to the school or not as part of your application, is often discoverable. So we encourage them junior year and senior year to make sure that what they're posting on any social media site is appropriate and that they've gone through, if necessary, and taken down, because colleges do, not all of them, but a lot of them do go on and they explore those social media sites, especially if the student might be on the fence in terms of admission. Prior year FAFSA is the third thing after the SATs, the Coalition app, and then this to hit that class of 2017. And that is when college will accept a parent's, not their prior year tax return, but their prior year tax return, so that they can file for financial aid much earlier, actually in October, as opposed to waiting until January for that. So what's been happening with private schools, students are finding out much earlier than they ever used to whether or not they're going to be going to be able to afford those private schools on their list. And if they can't, they don't even finish their application or may not even apply altogether, because you can certainly list schools on your FAFSA that maybe you don't actually go through the admissions process with. So private schools are finding that. They're not even giving them that chance to say, hey, you're already in, now let me see if we can talk you in. They're just unintentionally cutting them off at the pass. connected to, maybe, maybe not. Large public schools found themselves very over-enrolled last year. Penn State, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia Tech, they all reported last year that their yield estimates were significantly off, causing them to scramble to find housing for incoming freshmen. There are a lot of schools who have leased or rented or even bought old hotels, local apartment complexes. A lot of them are building new facilities in anticipation of future years to come as well. So they're seeing a large increase overall in enrollment, whether that is for financial reasons, I can't say for sure, but I'd like to think that I have to think it was connected. And last but not least, colleges are spending much more money on mental health resources. Research out of Massachusetts General Hospital revealed that 50 to 60% of college students currently have a psychiatric disorder, which first is awfully alarming. However, keep in mind that they do include learning disabilities and attention issues in that number as well. At the New Jersey Association for College Admissions Counseling Fall Kickoff, one of our counselors attended, and the admissions officers from, it was Rowan, Ryder, Bucknell, Pitt, and Princeton were saying that the colleges had to reallocate money to hire counselors, social workers, and other mental health support personnel, which has significantly taken away from other resources. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it just was not initially anticipated by those schools. And the counselor was saying to me, you know, the counselors were asking, so what's going on? Like, what's happening? And the colleges were asking, you tell us, I don't know, what's happening, what's going on? So the reasons behind it aren't necessarily anything that we can directly put our finger on or narrow down to one thing, but both sides are trying to work together at least to catch the issues earlier, address them as soon as possible, and have the resources to be able to do that. More specifically, colleges cited that students don't know how to address setbacks, like maybe getting their first C in college. They are getting an awful lot of parent phone calls and emails, to which they do not reply, obviously, for privacy reasons, students over 18 by that point. And there are other colleges who are becoming more proactive. MIT requires incoming freshmen to complete an online simulation program that teaches them the warning signs of depression and other psychiatric issues before they're allowed to enroll in their first semester courses. TCNJ has made resiliency their top school goal overall above everything else. They want to produce mentally healthy graduates and are advertising supports at every opportunity, at open houses, acceptance students days, orientations. They now have a suicide prevention task force. They screen all incoming students for addiction, and they actually have a recovery house on campus now. So in conclusion, this is generally the more fun of the two reports that I present annually, and I don't like to end on a down note, but I thought it was sort of fitting to close with this mental health information from the college perspective and point of view, to tell you a little bit about what they're seeing as it relates to next month's Trends in Mental Health report that I will present and report out on data from last school year from Bernards Township. Thank you. Questions from the board? Oh.
First of all, thank you for this very thorough and enlightening report. I think this is a highlight every year. It's nice to see the success of our students. I have two questions on different topics.
Okay.
One is about the SAT subject test. You provided good data on trends with the scores. Mm-hmm. Do you have any data regarding the number of students taking the test? Is it declining? Is it stable?
I can go back and pull that and send that to you as an addendum.
Yeah, I'm just curious because it seems like less schools are requiring the SAT subject test, so I was curious to see if your students were taking it.
I can do like a 5-year trend kind of thing.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then my other question is about the ACT. I know in the past there's been some conversation about making Ridge an ACT testing location, which would alleviate some of the stress of our students taking the test, because it's, first of all, Bridgewater fills up, so a lot of kids get shut out of Bridgewater, but even going to any school that's not a home school adds stress. So is there any update on the status of making Ridge an ACT testing site?
I have not spoken with Mr. Kraus about it this year. I did attempt twice, and this is not a great sign. I put in, hey, if you want to become an ACT test site, fill in your information. I filled that out twice last year and never got any response. My name was on it, Mr. Hallett's name was on it, neither of us ever had, which does not bode well in my opinion. Okay. Also because we've had some difficulty with them with their accommodation system as well. It makes me a little bit nervous to endeavor on something where a lot of institutions also have difficulty with it, especially if they're not even getting back to us.
Yeah, it's
Not to say we
disheartening,
can't try, but
I mean, I'm sure the students and the families who are driving them would appreciate it, but we can't make them do it.
It's not for a lack of trying on our part, or at least a lack of finding out more information.
That's appreciated.
One question about the test prep.
Yeah.
I know at some point in the distant past there was like a at-school test prep class at Ridge. I don't know, there's different options that some schools offer during the school. I know schools that host them at night in the evening and stuff, but that's different. But during school, have you just discussed that in recent times?
I don't believe it's come up in recent years. The schools that do that offer it as an elective.
Like a half-year elective or a quarter?
Some
of a
mandatory,
semester?
some not mandatory elective, but yes, as a half-year courses. I can double check with Dr. Heineman, but I don't believe the conversation has come up in recent years. This is my 9th year here, and we did not have those electives, so it's been at least probably about 10 years since
don't kill me if I say, but option 2 might provide an opportunity for like a marking period long course for some kids, because
I don't do
mention
option 2 anymore.
but-
It's okay. I'll make a note and I'll talk to Dr. Heineman about that.
I had a question. So I was looking at when you had the trends, the AP Equity and Excellence 5-year.
Yes.
And I noticed that between 2012 and 2017, the 10th grade went from 1.6% to 13%. And to me, that's a really high jump for when we're talking about stress levels and kids taking APs and they're only in 10th grade. And I don't know, is it because of the math because how the math changed that we have that many more kids in 10th grade taking an AP course?
It has to do with the restrictions that we allow. There are courses. So when I started here, we didn't allow 10th graders to really enroll in any APs.
Well, that's how.
And then,
that's what I think would be more appropriate because, especially now, I mean, we talk about stress all the time.
Yep.
I look at
No,
1% to 13%. I was like, holy crap, that's a big jump for, so that's the reason because we relaxed the rules for.
in some subject areas, and since then, some have been tightened up again, so it's kind of gone back and forth.
Right, because I just thought that
times.
was that just stood out. The other aren't as big.
No, the 10th grade definitely.
and
I was talking about the AP Comp Sci jump because of the 10th graders. Well, this year they reined it back, and aside from the STEAM program, there weren't 10th graders in Comp Sci, so next year's numbers should be different. Also, students are limited to taking one social studies elective, even though they could potentially qualify for 3. So we have 3 subject areas in social studies that allow 10th graders, but a 10th grader cannot enroll in more than 1. So that's sort of one of the limitations that they added back onto it to try to mitigate that.
Okay. I had something else too. Oh. And the your alumni tracking. I mean, I don't know how really accurate it is.
Agreed.
But do you have the number? So that's from it's 2014 to 2016, and it says 55% are still in full time. Do you have the number of kids who actually went to 4-year colleges,
From prior,
like those same
yeah.
years, so that I mean, it would just be probably not that accurate, but you just say that 95% of those kids went to 4-year colleges, only 55% are left.
Yeah, I can pull the past
I mean,
post-secondary
it's not in the-
reports.
I was just wondering if you.
Off the top of my head, our percentages
numbers are
for
high.
Sure. Our percentages for 4-year colleges, since I've been doing the report, have always been in the 80s. This year, we bumped it up to the 90s.
I was just
so
surprised by 55%.
that was a little
number.
bit lower. But again, I
But
don't
mean,
know
not everyone.
exactly.
I mean, not everyone answered, so it's just
Sure.
a hard number to. But it was just such a jump that I thought, when we're talking about all this stuff, like the stresses and the, you know, we don't know, and kids, all our kids can get into college, but it's whether they can actually last the 4 years
Exactly.
of college is the question sometimes.
I was hoping that the alumni tracker would provide a little more insight than it actually did, but
I mean, people, they don't
you can
answer
change the
questions.
years on that, but there's not much else you can manipulate in regards to the data.
Right, and, you know, I just was looking at your college admission stuff, and I don't know, have they taken any responsibility for the problems they're having with the mental health of the kids getting to college? Because
I did not attend that particular session where this was discussed, but I did not get
I
that
look at it
impression.
like they're putting the pressure on the kids so that we have kids like even though early the new normal, I'm not even, I mean, you have more experience than me, but you think that all this, or these kids having to decide so early, like the early action, it's better, it takes this pressure off, or it puts the pressure on?
I think it's a little bit of both, and it depends on the student as well. I think by and large, it's a good thing because students are inevitably going to fill out some applications earlier and are ready to do that, and to find out early is certainly helpful for them, either to say, hey, I'm done, or hey, I need to do more. But there are other students that are rushing to do those early applications just to get them in, and would they have benefited for another month's worth to really look at it?
Because
But
there's
they're
a lot of
feeling
pressure to do it.
exactly.
And if you haven't done it, then people feel like they're late when they're really not late, they're just on time.
Exactly.
Kind of, so that, saying it's, I know it's.
Early is the new on time. Is that what it is now?
Like, you know, so then that makes. Well, exactly.
Sure.
That's what
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
saying. The colleges
Yeah.
are talking out both sides of their mouths here.
Yep.
Like they're trying, you know, it's a little late for mental health help when they're into college.
Right.
And you're already causing them to go crazy.
It's
already.
never too late, but
Thank you.
sure.
I just have one. Under the, for the APs, the number of students that are enrolled versus the number of students who actually take the test. I would think if you're going to spend the year in an AP course, you would take the test. So what accounts for when they don't? And then the other thing is, for most of them, you're only talking about a couple. But when you look at environmental science, there were 120 enrolled, but only 80 took. That seems like a large amount that didn't take it.
Especially for that one, but where you're seeing the larger discrepancies, often they're in courses where a number of seniors are enrolled, and by the time the APs come around, they know what college they're going to, and if they know their college isn't going to accept the credit, they're not going to bother sitting for the test. Sure.
Do you ever get feedback through the counseling department about that specific concern? I'm speaking personally. My kids found that AP statistics is not necessarily widely accepted by colleges. Do we ever talk about that at the time of enrollment? Not that you should discourage them from taking statistics.
Sure. I don't think it's necessarily spoken about unless there's a particular question asked at the time of enrollment, because even though that the college may not accept the credit from it, they may still want to see an AP, you know, in terms of rigor on your schedule. So for a large part of our students, they're taking it for the rigor, and probably because they're able to, and not necessarily looking to get college credit down the line. It's just sort of a icing on the cake if they do.
You can actually see that in the AP Lang and Lit, because you can see that they all took the AP Lang exam, and then the next year when they were seniors, a lot of them didn't take it, because most of the colleges only let you get credit for one English, and they know that.
Exactly.
So if they did well the year before, then why would you
bother?
take the test? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gotcha.
Okay, we are up to item 12, which is the superintendent's report, and there's one item. Would someone like to make a motion for that item? Mrs. Woldridge and Mrs. Korn. Okay, does anyone have any questions about this item before we vote on it? No? Could we do a roll call, please?
That's okay.
Mrs. Korn,
Yes.
Mrs. White,
Abstain.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray.
Yes.
Thank you. I got that one. I got that one, Mr. McLaughlin. We're good.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So you have anything else for the superintendent's report? Okay.
Just briefly, thank you to our board members who were sworn in this evening, and a welcome to our newest board member, Jen White. So congratulations to Jen, and we really look forward to having you on the board. And briefly, I hope everybody had a nice, restful time away from the routine, some time with family, and a chance for some rest and relaxation, I hope. And welcome to 2018. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Markarian. We're up to approval of minutes. Can we have a? Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it. I forgot how to do this. Okay, we're up to public comment on agenda items. So if anyone has comments on anything on the agenda, there's not a whole lot on the agenda tonight, but if anyone has comments on something that is on the agenda, you can come up. There's a sign-in sheet down there, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. There'll be another public comment later in the meeting if you have comments on something that's not on the agenda. Okay, I don't see anyone out there for public comment. So I will close public comment. Now we're up to approval on minutes. Does somebody want to make a motion? Mrs. Swerner and Mrs. Woldridge. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes?
Mrs. White,
Abstain.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Korn,
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen,
Yes.
Madam President.
Thank you. We're up to committee reports, and I don't think a lot of committees met since our last meeting. Do we have anything from the Finance Committee for a report, or just the item?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay.
Because I have the December report.
Oh, okay.
but I wasn't
Oh, yeah, you didn't do the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay, I remember that now. Okay, so why don't we do a motion for this item, and we'll vote on that first, and then you can do the report. Okay, Mrs. Woldridge, do we have a second? Mrs. Gray? Okay, can we have a roll call for this item, and then we'll do the committee report.
Mrs. Swerner,
Yes.
Mrs. Gray,
Yes.
Mrs. White,
Abstain.
Mrs. Richmond,
Yes.
Mrs. Korn,
Yes.
Mrs. Woolridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McEwen,
Yes,
Madam President.
thank you. Okay.
After I do this, I guess. Okay, so the Finance Committee met on December 14th. We've already approved the agenda items from that meeting, but I have the committee the report from the actual meeting. So the first item on the agenda was an update on the self-insurance for the health benefits. And Ron Wendroff from Arthur Gallagher obtained preliminary information on stop-loss coverage from Symetra, a reinsurance company that Arthur Gallagher approves as a stop-loss provider. Aggregate stop-loss can now be offered at 115% as opposed to 125%, which was the level that was discussed by Arthur Gallagher at the November 13th board presentation. This means that the district's exposure and need to use a reserve is further minimized. Arthur Gallagher also said that with the aggregate stop-loss coverage, the plan would pay any claims up to $1 million, which exceeded the 115%, but if claims exceeded that additional $1 million, the district would be responsible. The next item has to do with a possible increase in labor costs due to an increase in New Jersey's minimum wage. So it's been reported that Governor-elect Murphy supports an increase in New Jersey's minimum wage to $15 per hour. The timing of such legislation and its effective dates are unknown at this time, but a minimum wage increase would impact two Aramark contracts, the food service and the custodial grounds and maintenance. So a minimum wage of $15 per hour would add a total cost of $381,000 to the two contracts, $165,864 for the food service and $215,000 for the custodial grounds and maintenance. Yeah. So short-term measures could be used to cover a cost increase for custodial grounds and maintenance, depending on the timing of the legislation. But in future years, the district's operating budget would need to be restructured to sustain the services level. To cover a cost increase for food service, the district would need to reconsider the structure of its food service program costs and revenues, including the food pricing throughout the district. The next item is a new Ridge High School alarm system and Bluetooth entry system. Maffey Security Group, which is located in Elizabeth, New Jersey, will install an alarm system on 100 doors in the Ridge building. Centralized control panels that light up if a door is ajar will be installed at the front of the building. In addition to the alarm system, a Bluetooth entry system will be installed in 2 locations at the front and back of the atrium of the new gym. This system works with smartphones and will be connected to the alarm system. Each smartphone will have a unique entry code that will disable the door alarm and unlock the door. Initially, only staff will use the entry system on a trial basis. Some changes to door hardware are needed for the Bluetooth entry system. Other security enhancements under consideration at Ridge are 3M film to cover windows, for example, the cafeteria windows at the front of the building, security upgrades to the front entrance, and additional security cameras. The next item, we talked very briefly about the weighted enrollment adjustment if the district should end up getting an increased enrollment. The state uses a 6-year average of enrollment based on the head count in October of each year. And the formula results in a lag of at least 1 year between the time an enrollment increase occurs and the cap adjustment takes effect. For example, if the school district had an enrollment increase in the 2019-2020 school year, a cap adjustment would not be permitted until the following school year, which is 2020 to 2021. And that's my report. Does anybody have any questions? Mrs. Korn?
Yeah, only about the, and I know it's probably very, very, very preliminary, right? The whole security thing for Ridge High School. It's like
Pardon me, the
security thing for Ridge High School. It's very, very preliminary, I'm assuming,
Yes.
right? So that when you say the smartphone entry, that's not the only entry, like there's
This
an
would be the-
alternative to a smartphone, yeah?
Well, this system is a scalable system, so you could put it in at other entrances throughout the building.
I don't mean other entrances, I mean like to get in, you need to have a smartphone to actually enter the school.
There's other means.
There's other means, like there's a card, because, my son doesn't have a smartphone right now because I removed it from his
I
possession.
think
So I'm just saying if it was a problem.
I think
Okay,
we're
let's
a
just
ways
throw it
off
out
from
there.
students using
Yeah,
it.
it's staff.
Oh, okay. So I just was
Yeah.
curious as to,
And really, for the most part, I mean, most student access and egress happens during, you know, the passing times at the beginning of the day and the end of the day when the doors are wide open anyway. What
The
we're really
doors-
looking for is control over the time in between that for staff to come in and other individuals to come in and out of the building.
okay. It was just curious. I thought there was a way for the kids to get in as well, so. Awesome.
Mrs. Gray?
I was just, for myself, but also because I sat in on the meetings, wanted to get a little more detail on the stop-loss information. If I remember correctly, it's 0.1% on the actuarial tables.
Right,
What
and
the-
that was predicated on 125%. So I'm trying to think how to put that in perspective without the table in front of us. I think I know what you're asking, but if you think of it as a layer cake, and, you know, if the very top layer is that part where we're at risk, meaning this is where 100% is, and from here to here was 125 that we were potentially exposed at, now that's dropped by 10%. Okay? So that 0.1% now probably falls, I'd have to go back and check it, within the $1 million that they would actually be covering now. So the 100 to 115 is what we would have to cover.
Right.
And $1 million above that is what the policy would cover. And that puts us at about the 0.1%.
That's what I was just trying to get at, because when you hear that information without all that detail that we had a couple of times, you just hear the part about, well, the district would be responsible, but from a statistical perspective, it's
It's a minimal
very
exposure,
small.
yeah. The Arthur Gallagher actuary felt that our exposure, I mean, they just couldn't give me any examples. Not that there are a lot of school districts doing this, but statistically, they didn't feel that, you know, that it was something that we really should be losing any sleep over.
Thank you. I just had a question and comment about the cap waiver discussion at Finance, because I wasn't there. Just for the public's benefit, we have a 2% cap on our budget, and so if our enrollment went up and we needed to spend more than 2% because we had a lot more students come, you're allowed to get a cap waiver, which lets you go above for enrollment. And so what the discussion was at Finance was how that works, and it's complicated. As Mr. McLaughlin has explained, there's a whole formula, but I guess the concerning part to us is that there's this lag where they look back 6 years. So my question is, Linda, you explained about how it would be delayed by a year where you would even be able to get a cap waiver, but then aren't they calculating it based on the past 6 years so that you would be hurt, like,
You wouldn't get 100%.
right, because
So it's catching up.
it would be way behind
Right.
by like 6 years.
It would
Okay.
take a while.
It would take a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the biggest challenge is that you're going to, the first year that you have the enrollment, you have to have a way to accommodate it without the adjustment. So
Right.
once you've done that, the question is, what structural changes did you have to make to do that, depending on the cost of it? And really, to put all of that, and I know that was last month's report, but
Right.
this month we're going to have the demographer's report on the 22nd, and I think that the information in there is going to be extremely helpful to us and put this in a much more comfortable context than all of the conjecture that we've had to deal with.
Right. Mrs. Warner?
If I can put it in the context that makes it even more tangible, if the state comes in and mandates COA, putting in mandatory lower income housing in the town, it's very challenging because if they're looking at a 6-year average, but we have 200 new students in the 6th year of the 6-year average, it could put us in a very precarious situation. My question is it possible to reach out to fellow superintendents or business administrators and see if there are any towns out there ahead of us on the curve where the COA ruling has gone in already to see how they've handled it when there's been an exceptionally negative impact on their budget?
Well, I don't want to speak for Nick. I can just tell you what I know so far. first of all, without kind of spilling the beans on the demographer's report, because we do have a draft of it, we got it. And we will discuss it with the Finance Committee, but Nick and I are waiting to talk with the demographer. We literally got it just the day before the Christmas break, like the last hours, and we looked at it. And I reached out to him today, and he's away for the rest of this week, but early next week, we're going to ask him a few questions. But preliminarily, it would suggest that we may not have as big of a problem as we are conjecturing, because we are experiencing, on the one hand, irrespective of what happens with any new development, a decline in enrollment. And so, you know, you have to think about that in the context of, say, where we would be 2 years from now versus an influx of students, and whether that would all hit us at once, because even if they build the buildings, we don't know that really everything would be built and fully occupied and students enrolled all at one time. You know, it could take a year or two. So when you look at those mitigating factors, at least, it's just, I'm speaking for myself now, my initial read is that it's maybe not as worrisome as we thought it would be in terms of that particular facet of it.
And just to follow up on your question, I actually asked that question to the superintendents in Somerset County the last time I met with them, and they're experiencing generally a decline in enrollment more than a sudden influx, so they weren't a lot of help. They're wonderful people, but they hadn't experienced it yet.
But we've been brainstorming what we would do if we needed to come up with some additional revenues or stretches anyway, and there are things we could do.
But we did confirm that Dr. Grip is coming on January 22nd, so that's good news.
That's really good news, yeah.
Did anyone else have questions about the Finance Committee report? No? Okay. Personnel Committee did not meet since the last report. The Policy Committee did not meet, right, since the last report. Curriculum Committee did not meet since the last report. Advocacy?
No.
Did not meet.
Next week.
Any liaison reports?
No, Municipal Alliance is meeting next Tuesday.
Okay. And the Ad hoc SEL Committee did meet, but I don't think it has minutes yet because it was right before the break.
Right, it was literally immediately before the break.
Yeah.
And,
Okay, so we'll get that
they'll be
report
ready for the
next time.
January meeting.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, we're up to public comment on non-agenda items. If anyone has a comment on anything that they would like to speak about, please sign in on this sheet down below. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. Happy New Year. James Vopel, 20 Evergreen Place. Congratulations to Mrs. McEwen for your appointment as board president. Mrs. Gray, your appointment on vice president. Welcome, Mrs. White, to the board. We look forward to the fine things that you'll be contributing to the board. A couple things quickly. First, I don't know if you are all aware. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for your interest in the enrollment numbers, because that really concerns me. I think it concerns a lot of people in town with respect to what is the possibility that's going to be developed in the quarry, also at Dewey Meadow, because that is currently under lawsuit, I think, that they're suing the town, and that they are proposing 250 affordable housing units in that area. So that, coupled with the 200 affordable housing units at the quarry, you're looking at 450. If you just take one student per household, that's 450 new students, and we know that we're not using those types of numbers as one student per family. So I just wanted to thank you for constantly being on top of that, because I think you guys taking an active role with the Township Committee, because I don't think they're throwing numbers out. They're thinking this is not going to be an issue for the schools, and I'm very worried about that, because if they don't see the forest for the trees, then we as the taxpayers are going to be hit with the burden. Okay, you guys as a board are going to have to make some really, really tough decisions. And I don't think you want that in the future. I, as a taxpayer, do not want my taxes increased, and I don't want the schools to be expanded. I don't want redistricting to take place. I don't think any of us in town want that. But I want to address this question to Mr. Markarian. Has you or the board looked at the classrooms available within the district currently? Meaning, what type of available classroom space do we have in all of the buildings that would allow for an increase in enrollment? I know that we have STEM rooms and computer labs, just to give two examples of classrooms that were turned into these types of rooms. So you take away a classroom from a building to implement and utilize for these things. And so if you could maybe conduct a study with regards to classroom space in each of the buildings with respect to a possible population expansion. I know that we have trouble at WAMS. We're almost maxed out at WAMS. I know that the board is considering expansion of the cafeteria with respect to block scheduling so everybody can eat. So you're looking at a lot of things going on. So I'm hoping that the board will just take a look at those things, because it's important to make sure that we have the available space. And I don't think we do in a lot of the schools in our district. With respect to the numbers, as I mentioned before, the Township Committee, I don't think really has a clue. And the only people that I trust are you guys. Okay? You guys have firsthand knowledge of the population explosion. You have firsthand knowledge of, right now we're kind of in a decrease of student enrollment. And I know that you had want to maybe bring back some of the programs that you had to cut when it was time to do all that stuff in 2011, because now the enrollment is down and you have the ability to do that. Now you may not have that ability, and you may have to shelve that because of the fact that you're going to have to now think of the amount of students that may be coming into the district. So if you could just, either you could shoot me an email or whatever, are we at capacity in a lot of our buildings? And what is the type of space that we have available if we do need to expand? Because I think that's very, very important.
Excuse me, Mr. Opel, you have about 1 minute to go.
Okay, thank you. So again, I just want to thank you for your constant vigilance in terms of what's going on with the Township Committee. Please continue that communication, force them to show you where they're getting their numbers from, because I don't think they really know where they're getting their numbers from. And according to Mr. Draper and what I told the Township Committee in December, they're refuting that. And how can you refute Mr. Draper? He worked here for 30 years. I mean, he was the guy for all those years. So I just want to thank you for your vigilance. So it's appreciated.
Is there anyone else for public comment? Okay, I'm going to close public comment.
So just for the benefit of the questions and for the public, the demographer, as part of the analysis, is tasked with looking at school capacities and is provided with information from our district architect insofar as the design and capacities of the school building. So we should be able to glean that from the report, but if it's not adequate, we'll look at more. But it is part of the report, so we'll be going over that at the end of the month.
I just wanted to add that along with our concerns about the cap waiver situation, should we get more students, we are also concerned about the unknowns, with state aid, with the new governor. We don't know. We've heard that some districts don't get more state aid when they get more students, but things could be different with a different governor. And also concerns about any tax abatement, like pilot program or anything like that, that might be associated with any development. So we're trying to follow this as closely as we can right now. Okay, we're up to board forum. Does anyone have anything for board forum? Mrs. Werner?
I've got a quick and easy one. I just forwarded an email to Mr. Markarian that I received right before the holidays from Suzanne Ward, who teaches our Honors Gov students, the juniors. And Project Citizen is once again underway, and she has noted that board members may be approached by some students working on their Project Citizen projects. It's always a great way to get involved with students. You'll see in the email that's forwarded to you, she reminded us the students, shouldn't impose on our time. We should only help them when it's convenient. But any board member who's approached who's willing, it is greatly appreciated to help these students with their projects about government.
Mrs. Gray?
Just wanted to say a thank you to Mrs. Horner and Mrs. Wooldridge for their just turned it off. About 2 years of service in the capacity of president and vice president of our board. Thank you for your leadership.
Okay, you just said what I was going to say. It's okay. But I thank you guys too. And we all know, everyone on this board, what that entails and how much work it is.
It's always a great joy
Yeah.
to serve.
As she sits there and laughs. Okay. Does anyone else have anything for board forum? Okay, we are up to adjournment. Mrs. Horner. Would someone like to second it? Mrs. Korn. Okay, thank you. All in favor of adjourning? Do we have to do that?